Eggplant Parmesan coming up right now.
All right, so we want to make a sauce, and we want to make a simple sauce for this, just like the other Sicilian eggplant parm that I made. I don't want to make it about the sauce, I want to make it more about the eggplant. So here's the other ingredients. Garlic for the sauce. Eggplants, shiny eggplants. Try to buy shiny eggplants. It's the best you can do. Sometimes they're not perfect. There's basil, Parmigiano Reggiano. That's going to be for when we assemble the eggplant parm, and that's Pecorino Romano. That's going to be mixed with egg. Also, polio mozzarella, any brand's fine, eggs, and flour. This is pretty much all you're going to need. Some salt and pepper too. So this is a wired rack. This rack works well to salt your eggplants. You don't need to use this though. You can just use any flat baking tray or just your cutting board even. So I'm going to cut these eggplant to about a 1/2 inch to 5/8 of an inch thick. Doesn't have to be exact. About that size right there. And this is a good size. The salt's gonna draw some water out, which is gonna make them a little thinner. So you could cut them into discs. I just wanted to show you too, you can cut these eggplant into strips, and you can cut them into a 1/2 strip like I'm doing here. And that's fine. Those are basically the same size, they're the same thickness still. There's a bunch of ways to do this. You can even cut full-length strips, like I'm going to show you with this eggplant. I want to show you all the options you have. Nothing has to be done a set specific way at all. You know, you might develop a way that you like, and that might become your own. But there's all my eggplant. They're all the same thickness, so it's all going to fry at the same rate. So I have 5 full eggplants here. Some of them had seeds in them. That was unavoidable. And when the summer comes, you'll get better eggplant in the store. It always works out that way. But these will be fine for now. And I'm going to lay them all out on my wired rack. And in order to draw water out, we're going to use a lot of salt. So kosher salt's fine. You can use regular salt too. We just want to make sure that we remove most of this salt before we start cooking it later on. But that'll be for later on. For now, let's heavily salt these eggplants. The salt's just going to draw the water right out of the eggplant. I hope you can see it there, how much salt I put on. A decent amount, probably a few tablespoons right there for that one tray. And I'm going to put another layer of paper towels here and another layer of eggplant. Now you could just build this up like this. This would be totally fine. So if you don't have a bunch of trays, you don't need it. You could just keep stacking them. And there's those long strips, which is great. And I mean, that makes it easier when you do the strips. Not as much things that you have to flour or, an egg wash. So I'm putting more salt on top of this layer. And just really get that salt on there. Don't be shy with it. It's okay. You're gonna get rid of most of it later on. And I used 5 pretty large eggplants, so I'm using another tray here. And this is like what you want to do when you're making eggplant parm. You want to make a lot of it because it is a process, and it's no point just making a tiny bit of it, right? That's the way I feel. I want to make it for everybody, and I want to have good leftovers. So this tray I'm showing, got a bunch of trays here. These are all from Costco. Very good deal, by the way. If you they still have them there too. So I'm putting more paper towels down, and I'm going to take that extra tray I have, and I'm going to put it right on top. But that's not enough. We want to force the water out more. Let's use these huge cans of tomatoes. These are 120-ounce cans of tomatoes, also from Costco. I shop at Costco a lot. Now I have some smaller ones. You can see all the brands I use. I always like to mix up my brands. I'm not loyal to any one company. And this will be enough weight. If you got a dumbbell, use that. I mean, that would probably work even better. All right, so now this is going to be the tomato can that I use to make the sauce. So wipe it off, get the dirt off, and open it up. And if your tomatoes have basil in them, sometimes they'll have a piece or two of basil. You can just discard that because that's been in there for a very long time. If you're going to use basil, put in some fresh basil. So these are whole plum tomatoes, San Marzano tomatoes. This is a pretty good brand. I use it. It's on sale a lot, and Uncle Giuseppe's in Long Island where I get them. And I'm just going to put not all of them in here, and I'm not going to dump it in because I don't want it to splatter everywhere. So I'm just going to use a spoon, and I just want to demonstrate. Again, very clean hands. Wash your hands. I just washed my hands, and use a shield hand and you can squeeze them. Now, if you don't want to do this, feel free to put them in the blender and just pulse it for 1 or 2 seconds, and that would be totally fine. Totally fine. I like hand crushing them because it gives it more of a texture like this. See that nice texture? And a lot of people do it that way. But again, you don't have to do it that way. You can do whatever you want. So I'm going to take some garlic. And in my previous one, I only just took a couple cloves whole and I just, sauteed them in the olive oil, and that was it. This one, I'm going to slice them today. I do things different often. It makes it more interesting for me. I don't get to say, oh, I have my one eggplant parm recipe. I have a bunch of eggplant parm recipes. So there's the garlic. And I just like doing that. It makes it more interesting for me as the cook, and it'll make it more interesting for you as a cook so that you have different recipes. So I'm going to slice up this garlic. I'm doing about 5 cloves here. Now I have a lot of tomatoes. That was 100, I think that's a 105 ounce or 110 ounce can, which is the equivalent of 3 large 28 ounce standard cans of American plum tomatoes. And this is going to give me enough sauce to not just make this batch, but to make another batch of eggplant parm. So I'm going to keep the heat pretty low here, about low to medium low. And I'm going to put just a touch of olive oil in here. I'm using extra virgin olive oil, but use regular olive oil, but just a little bit, because when you fry eggplant, it's very oily. So we don't want to add that much more oil to our sauce. So that's a little trick. And, I didn't invent that. I learned that from somebody else. Don't know who. Maybe my grandmother. So 3, 4, 5 minutes, the garlic is going to get lightly golden. It'll take some, make some nice flavor in that oil. And then I'm going to take those hand-crushed plum tomatoes and get them all in there. And I'm just going to stir this around, let those flavors come together, and low heat, low to medium low, bring it up to a simmer, and then essentially the sauce will be done. Like, it'll be a good enough sauce. It'll be a great sauce. I'm just putting a touch of salt in here. You can taste that sauce too to make sure it tastes perfect, but we want this to be an eggplant forward taste. So yeah, I'm showing the basil. Don't want to put the basil in now. I'm going to layer the pieces, little pieces, hand torn, when we assemble the eggplant parmesan. So I'm going to remove the sauce, put it off to the side. And now it's been about 2 hours for my eggplant. And you can do this much longer. You could do it 4 hours. You could do it 5 hours. So a lot of Italian grandmothers will do this overnight. It's very common. See how wet that is? So a lot of the water from the eggplant just absorbed right into it. A lot of it drained into the pan. And I'm trying to squeeze it now to show you. I don't know if I'm fully demonstrating it, but you can actually take the eggplant and squeeze it, and you can squeeze a lot of the water out of it. So I'm just going to temporarily move them into this other pan, but they're not, they still have too much salt on them, so we have to remove that salt. If you don't do this, see, that's some of the water right there. If you don't do this, your eggplant's gonna be a little salty. So I washed that pan off, cleaned it, dried it, and you can do one of two things here. You can take a paper towel, a slightly damp paper towel, really scrub it to get a lot of the salt off, or you can actually take your eggplant and you can rinse them in the sink, in a colander. Either way, you want to dry them off. You want to take most of this excess water out because you're going to be frying them soon. Do the work here, get that salt, most of the salt off. It's going to help you later on. Pecorino Romano is very salty. That's the cheese that we're grating right now. And I'm going to grate up about a half a cup of it. And this doesn't have to be exact. When we mix it with the egg, if we don't have enough cheese, we'll grate some more. If, say, like we have too much eggplant and we need to crack 2 more eggs, we'll just grate a little bit more Pecorino Romano. It's that simple. But this is a good starting point right here, the half cup of Pecorino Romano grated. Okay, and here's my 5 eggs. And ideally, you want to crack each egg into a bowl so you don't contaminate if you have a bad egg, but I took a chance here, So my 5 eggs are good. I'm going to beat them up well. This is going to be our seasoning. you know, like our batter for our eggplant. So we're going to season this batter up with pepper. Put a nice amount of pepper. And the star is the Pecorino Romano in here. When you fry up the eggplant with the egg and the Pecorino Romano, it's so good just like that. Sometimes you don't even want to continue to make the full eggplant parmesan, you know? So you mix it all around, and that's kind of what you're going to start with. You have an eggplant, all your eggplant, you have your flour, and then you have your egg wash. So you want to get your oil up to about 350. I'm using regular olive oil here to fry. You could also use canola oil or half and half. I'm not going to judge, you know. I'm never going to tell you to fry in extra virgin olive oil. Not for this. I mean, that's kind of crazy because you're doing so many batches of this. So right here, use the end of a spoon. When it starts bubbling like that, just a bit of a bubble, you're good. So you dip it in the flour, and then you put it in the egg wash, and just like kind of shake off the excess, and you get it right in the olive oil. I'm just speeding up here to show you. I'm getting them all in, and they're going to take about 3 to 5 minutes per side. They're not going to take very long. Just going to flip them over. They get this nice ultra golden color, just like this, and they are so good like this. And right when they look really brown like that, nice golden brown, you put them on. I have the wire rack again and paper towels. And I want them to dry really well. You can even take paper towels on the other side to pat them dry too. We want to try to remove as much oil as we can here from our fry. And then start on the next batch. And they're looking so good. They are so good. You could just dust them with more pecorino now. Maybe a little bit of salt if they're not too salty. Look at that right there. The way this is made already, it's so good like this. You can just make it like this. You could just literally stop and have an awesome eggplant dish. The pecorino and the egg, this is how my grandmother would always make them. She would make them like this. A lot of times she just eat them like this. Now, using this to assemble eggplant parmesan is amazing. There's a bunch of ways to make this. That's why we're doing a few different episodes on this. What I was doing, and you saw me doing it, you take your fork as you're cooking it. They took about 5 to 8 minutes to fry, and they're pretty much cooked all the way through now. They're delicious. I tasted one. You take a knife and you cut a piece, and you try it. Now, don't put any more salt on these. Normally with fried food, you want to put more salt on, but the fact that they were already salted heavily, even though we wiped it off and got a lot of it off, it might be too salty. And because we added 4 ounces of Pecorino Romano to that egg batter. So they're plenty salty now, but taste them. And if you do think it needs it, then you hit them up with a little bit of salt, because that's when fried food is the best. All right, so now we are ready for assembling. I got 2 bowls here because I know I have a lot of eggplant, and I have my basil, I have my Parmigiano Reggiano. But we're gonna use both of these to make our layers. So yeah, we have the eggplant. I patted it dry. We have our nice marinara sauce, and you want to get a big layer of sauce on the bottom here, about 1/4 inch. Don't be shy with this, because we don't want the eggplant to stick at all. That's just a great looking sauce. It's a simple sauce. It's a delicious sauce. I switched angles up. And we're going to take this eggplant and we're going to start making layers. Now, depending on the size of the bowl you have here, of the baking dish you have, you might have to cut and, do a little surgery, I guess, to fit them, and that's totally fine. But try to fit whatever you can, and if you need to fill in a spot, you just cut it. And maybe you eat the other half, And that's looking okay. Yep, I'm going to try to squeeze one more piece in there. And that's layer number 1. So on top of layer number 1, we want to add more sauce. And again, don't be shy with it. All these flavors are going to come together into the most delicious thing. basil. Nice fresh basil. And I hand tear it and put a bunch of leaves there. If you don't like that much basil, you know, don't use it. But I really think it adds to it. Parmigiano Reggiano, I'm gonna grate a bunch on there. You know, this is eggplant parmigiana. That's the cheese you're supposed to use. And I have mozzarella. I have shredded mozzarella already. You can use a block of polio you can grate on. If you freeze it, it's easier to grate. You could use fresh mozzarella too. So I'm gonna put a lot more sauce on, and I'm gonna keep leveling this up. So I'm gonna do one more big layer here. And it's really high up. The only thing is, on the last layer, you don't want to put any mozzarella if you cook it at 400. If you're gonna cook it lower, it'll take longer. Then you can put the mozzarella on top. So we're gonna get it in the oven for right here at 400 degrees for about 30 minutes. That's gonna be a snack or a leftover. And that's how it looks like. So you need to let this rest for like 20 minutes before you even think about eating it. You could probably let it rest a half an hour. So I'm gonna leave it here like this. That is how you make eggplant parm, Neapolitan style eggplant parm. We're gonna do Italian American style eggplant parm. We're also gonna do a Sicilian style, which is the simplest one. I'm not sure which order these videos are gonna come up, but this is all a part of the eggplant parm series. If you haven't subscribed yet to this channel, please do, and watch another eggplant video. See you next time.